The aroma of roasted turkey filled the house, blending with the sound of laughter and soft music from an old radio in the kitchen. It was a typical Thanksgiving day for the Henderson family, or so it seemed, but inside that cozy home lay a secret so explosive it would change everyone's lives forever. At the center of it all was Emily, the youngest daughter, talented and full of dreams, yet completely unaware of the storm about to erupt. At 25, Emily was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. At that moment, sitting at the piano in the living room, she was improvising a melody that made the family stop and listen. "That's beautiful, Em," her sister Christine said, raising her head from a glass of wine, a distant smile on her face. Emily smiled back, but couldn't help noticing the melancholic tone in her sister's words. There was something in Christine's eyes, a weight, a mystery. It was something Emily had sensed her entire life, but had never questioned. "Why?" "Emily, sweetheart, stop playing for a moment and help me with the table," called her mother from the kitchen. She was a strong, practical woman who held the family together like the thread of a patchwork quilt. Emily obeyed, gently closing the piano and hurrying to help. While setting the plates, Emily noticed Christine and her mother exchanging quick glances, almost as if having a silent conversation. Emily ignored it, assuming it was just another of the many unspoken tensions between the two. After all, her sister Christine had always been the opposite of her mother, impulsive, carefree, and mysterious. Growing up, Emily had seen her mother as the epitome of stability. Helen was dependable to a fault, always ensuring that Emily had what she needed. Warm meals helped with her homework, and the firm but loving discipline that came with Helen's belief in structure. Helen rarely raised her voice, but when she did, it carried the weight of finality. Emily admired her mother's strength, even if it sometimes felt stifling. Christine, on the other hand, was a mystery. To Emily, she had always been the cool, older sister who lived on the edges of the family's carefully constructed world. Christine had a way of appearing and disappearing as she pleased, dropping into Emily's life with stories of places she'd been, people she'd met, and wild dreams she was chasing. She would ruffle Emily's hair, call her kiddo, and bring her gifts, trinkets that felt like treasures to a little girl hungry for Christine's attention. But Christine's visits often came with tension. Helen would watch her daughter warily, her lips pressed into a thin line, as she tried to gauge Christine's mood. Emily didn't understand it at the time, but looking back, she could see the worry in Helen's eyes, the unspoken fear that Christine might bring chaos back into the house or disappear again, leaving Helen to pick up the pieces. Despite their differences, there were rare moments of harmony. On a handful of evenings, when Christine wasn't away or wrapped up in her own world, the three of them would sit together on the porch. Helen would knit or sip tea. Christine would strum a guitar she rarely brought out, and Emily would sit at their feet, soaking in the fleeting sense of family. But as Emily got older, she started to notice the cracks in the dynamic. Christine's visits grew less frequent, and when she did come around, there was often an edge to her interactions with Helen. Their conversations were polite on the surface, but laced with tension. Helen would ask pointed questions about Christine's life, questions that seemed harmless but clearly grated on Christine's nerves. "Are you working now, Christine?" Helen would ask, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. Still figuring things out, Christine would reply with a shrug, her voice breezy. "Not everyone wants a 9-to-5, Mom. It's about stability," Helen would say, always the pragmatist. "Something you might think about someday." "Yeah, well, stability isn't for everyone," Christine would snap back before changing the subject or leaving the room. Emily often felt caught in the middle, unsure of how to bridge the gap between them. She adored Helen's steadiness, but longed for Christine's free-spirited presence. As a child, she would wait eagerly for Christine's sporadic visits, her excitement bubbling over as she told her sister about her piano recitals, her favorite songs, and the dream she had of becoming a musician. Christine would listen, nodding and smiling, but she never stayed long enough for Emily to feel like she really belonged in her world. Helen, for her part, tried to shield Emily from the reality of Christine's struggles. There were whispered arguments late at night, moments when Helen's calm facade cracked just enough for Emily to see her worry. Once, Emily had heard Helen say, "You can't keep running away, Christine. You have responsibilities." And Christine had fired back, "I'm trying. Do you think this is easy for me?" But by morning, everything would be back to normal, or at least Helen's version of normal. Breakfast would be on the table. Emily would head to school, and Christine would either be gone or sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon with a look that Emily didn't understand at the time. For years, this dynamic shaped Emily's view of her family. Helen was the constant, Christine the fleeting shadow, and Emily the one who floated somewhere in between, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't until much later that Emily began to question the roles they had all played and the secrets that lay beneath their carefully maintained facade. Hours before dinner, Emily decided to head up to the attic to fetch some last-minute decorations. The attic was a fascinating place, full of dusty boxes holding memories of generations past. Searching for ornaments, she stumbled across a box labeled Old Albums. Curious, she lifted the lid. Inside was a series of family photo albums. Emily smiled as she flipped through pictures of her childhood, her mother younger, smiling as she held her in her arms, Christine then a teenager, posing with an electric guitar. But something caught her eye. It was a photo that seemed out of place. Emily pulled the image closer. In it, Christine was visibly pregnant, wearing a floral dress with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. The date on the corner was 25 years ago, the same year Emily was born. Her heart raced. Why was Christine pregnant? It didn't make sense. Her mother had never mentioned anything about Christine having a baby. Before Emily could think further, she heard footsteps on the attic stairs. Her mother appeared at the doorway with a tense smile. "Ah, there you are. I was looking for you." Her eyes landed on the photo in Emily's hand. For a moment, she froze. Then, with calculated calm, she walked over to Emily, took the photo from her hands, and slipped it back into the album. "You shouldn't be poking around in this, dear. It's old stuff, not important." "But, Mom," Christine, she was pregnant. Emily tried to hide the anxiety in her voice. "It's not what it looks like," her mother replied quickly, closing the album and putting it back in the box. It was a complicated time. Better to leave it in the past and focus on the present. Christine would be upset if she knew you were digging through her history. Emily felt a pang of discomfort. Why was her mother so defensive? "Okay," she said reluctantly. But as she descended the stairs with the decorations in her hands, she couldn't shake the image from her mind. Something wasn't right, and she knew it. The dinner carried on, with laughter and casual conversation, masking the deeper tensions simmering beneath the surface. Emily found herself stealing glances at Christine and her mother, sensing something just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. She tried to focus on the moment, on the warmth of the food, the clinking of glasses, the familiar comfort of family. But her mind kept drifting back to the attic and that photo. Later in the evening, Emily retreated to the attic once more, her curiosity now a driving force. She found the box of albums again and opened it carefully. This time, she dug deeper, pulling out more pictures. A pattern began to emerge. Christine, young and glowing, unmistakably pregnant in several photos. But there were no images of a baby, no trace of the life that should have followed. It didn't add up. Her mother's voice startled her. "Emily, what are you doing up here again?" Emily turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression strained. "I couldn't stop thinking about it, Mom. There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Her mother sighed, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Emily, some things are better left in the past. Digging them up now won't do anyone any good." Emily stood her ground. "Maybe not for you, but I deserve to know the truth. I've felt it my whole life, that there's something you're keeping from me. Please, Mom, just tell me." Before her mother could respond, Christine appeared at the top of the stairs. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes glistened as though she'd been listening. She's right, Helen. She deserves to know. We can't keep this from her anymore. Her mother turned to Christine, her face pale. Christine ignored her. Emily, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. The reason you found those photos, the reason they don't make sense, is because they were taken when I was pregnant. With you. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to process. Emily blinked, as if trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. What are you talking about? You're my sister. Christine shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. I'm your mother, Emily. Helen isn't your mother. She's your grandmother. Emily staggered back, her breath caught in her chest. No, that can't be true. You're lying. I'm not lying, Christine said, her voice cracking. I was just a kid, Emily. I was 16 and I didn't know how to take care of you. I was going through things I didn't want to put you through. So Mom, Helen, she stepped in. She raised you as her own because I couldn't. Emily turned to her mother, her grandmother. You knew about this? You knew, and you never told me. Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears. I did what I thought was best for you, Emily. Christine wasn't ready, and you deserve stability. I made a choice, a hard one, but one I believed was right. Emily's voice rose, sharp with pain and disbelief. So you lied to me? My entire life. You let me think one thing when the truth was completely different. Her mother reached out to her. Emily, please. No, Emily said, pulling away. You both made decisions for me without ever thinking about what I might want. You hid the truth, and now, I don't know what's real anymore. Christine stepped forward, desperation in her voice. Emily, I'm so sorry. I was young and scared, and I thought I was doing the right thing, but I've regretted it every day since. I've wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how. Emily shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. This is too much. I need to get out of here. She pushed past them and ran down the stairs, grabbing her coat and keys on the way out. As the door slammed behind her, the house fell silent, save for the muffled sounds of Christine's sobs and her mother's whispered attempts to comfort her. Emily drove aimlessly, the events of the evening playing over and over in her mind. Her family, her entire life, suddenly felt like a lie. She thought of Christine, the sister she'd admired and resented in equal measure, now revealed as her mother. She thought of her mother, the woman who'd raised her, who'd sacrificed so much, but who'd also kept this monumental truth from her. And then, beneath all the anger and confusion, there was another thought. If Christine was her mother, who was her father? Emily drove through the quiet streets, her mind racing. She needed answers, but she also needed space. Time to process the seismic shift in her understanding of her own identity. She finally parked in an empty lot by the park, where she often went to clear her head. The night was cool, and the silence of the park felt heavy, yet comforting. She sat in her car for a long while, staring out the window, replaying the moment of Christine's confession over and over. Her thoughts inevitably turned to her father. If Christine was her mother, then the man she'd grown up believing was her father, a kind, steady man who had passed away when she was young, was not who she thought he was. And Christine and Helen had avoided that part of the story entirely, even after revealing the truth about Christine. What else were they hiding? Emily pulled out her phone and stared at the blank screen. She wanted to call someone, anyone, to help her make sense of it all. But who could she turn to when her entire family had conspired to keep such a monumental secret from her? She thought of her best friend, Sarah, but the idea of explaining everything felt exhausting. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts aimlessly, her thumb pausing over Christine's name. The thought of confronting Christine again filled her with dread and anger, but she couldn't let the question of her father linger unanswered. She took a deep breath, hit call, and held the phone to her ear. Christine picked up on the second ring, her voice trembling. "Emily? Are you okay?" Emily's voice was steady, but sharp. I need to know who my father is. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Emily thought Christine might hang up. But then, Christine sighed heavily. Okay, I'll tell you everything. I'm listening, Emily said. Your father is Daniel Cross. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the name instantly. Daniel Cross was a legend, a rock star whose music had shaped an entire generation. She had grown up hearing his songs, admiring his talent, never imagining that there could be any connection between his world and hers. You're telling me my father is Daniel Cross? The Daniel Cross? Emily asked, her voice rising. Yes, Christine said softly. It was a long time ago. I was young, rebellious, and going through a tough time. He came to our town during a tour, and it happened. I didn't tell him about you. I didn't think I could. He was so famous. And I was nobody. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel as the weight of the revelation settled over her. So, he doesn't even know I exist? No, Christine admitted, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if he knew he might not care, or worse, that he'd try to take you away. I made a choice, and I've regretted it every day. Emily was silent for a long time, her mind reeling. She had so many questions, but the one that came out surprised even her. Do you think he would have wanted to know me? Christine hesitated. I don't know, Emily. I honestly don't know. But you have a right to find out. Emily ended the call shortly after, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. Her father was alive. He was a rock star, and he had no idea she existed. The thought made her chest ache with both hope and fear. Could she reach out to him? Would he even want to know her? Or would she only be opening herself up to more rejection? She looked at her phone again, this time searching for information about Daniel Cross. His name and face popped up instantly, along with a list of upcoming tour dates. He was performing in a city not far from hers in just a few days. Without fully thinking it through, Emily clicked on the ticket link and purchased one. If her father didn't know she existed, it was time to change that. The day of the concert arrived faster than Emily expected. She spent most of it feeling a nervous energy she couldn't shake. Her mind swung between imagining what it would be like to meet Daniel Cross and dreading the possibility that he might reject her outright. What if he didn't believe her? What if he didn't want to know her at all? The weight of those questions pressed heavily on her chest, but she forced herself to push through. That evening, she dressed simply, hoping to blend into the crowd. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, not yet at least. When she arrived at the venue, the roar of the crowd and the pulse of the music as the opening band performed sent a rush of adrenaline through her veins. She found her seat but barely noticed her surroundings. Her focus was entirely on the moment Daniel would step onto the stage. When he did, it was electric. The audience erupted in cheers as he emerged under the bright lights, a guitar slung across his shoulder. His presence was magnetic, his voice powerful, and Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. That man, that legend, was her father. But as the concert progressed, her nerves began to creep in. She clutched the ticket stub in her hand like a lifeline, wondering how she would approach him after the show. She had managed to get a backstage pass, something she had agonized over acquiring, and now the reality of what she was about to do hit her in full force. When the final notes of the encore faded and the crowd began to disperse, Emily followed the small group of fans allowed backstage. Her heart pounded as they were led down a hallway to a green room where Daniel was meeting people. She stood at the back of the line, watching as he greeted fans with warmth and genuine smiles, taking photos, signing autographs, and exchanging quick pleasantries. He seemed down-to-earth, approachable, a stark contrast to the larger-than-life figure she'd imagined. Finally, it was her turn. She stepped forward, and Daniel turned his attention to her with a friendly smile. Hi there. Thanks for coming to the show. Emily's throat felt dry, but she managed to speak. Hi. I'm Emily. Emily Henderson. Daniel nodded politely. Nice to meet you, Emily. Did you enjoy the concert? I did. You were amazing, she said, then hesitated. But that's not why I'm here. His expression shifted slightly, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Oh. Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into her bag and pulled out a copy of her birth certificate. I think you're my father. The words hung in the air between them, and Daniel's easy demeanor fell away. He stared at her, his brow furrowing as he looked from her face to the document she held out. Slowly, he took it from her hands and studied it. When he saw Christine's name listed as the mother, his eyes widened. Christine Henderson, he said softly, almost to himself. I remember her. Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. She's my mom. She told me a few days ago. She said you didn't know about me. Daniel looked up at her, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and something Emily couldn't quite place. I didn't. I had no idea. There was a long, heavy pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. If I had known, Emily, I don't even know what to say. He stopped, running a hand through his hair as he searched for words. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. It's not your fault. I needed to know who you are. I needed to know where I come from. Daniel nodded slowly, still holding the birth certificate as if it were fragile. I can't believe this. All these years. I had no idea. Emily, if I had known about you, I would have. I don't know. I would have done something. The raw emotion in his voice made Emily's chest tighten. She wasn't sure what she had expected from him. Anger, disbelief, denial, but his sincerity took her by surprise. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. I'm not here to blame you or ask for anything, Emily said. I just needed to meet you. To tell you the truth. Daniel shook his head. You don't have to explain yourself. I'm the one who should be saying that. Emily, I want to know you. I don't know how this works. I don't even know where to start, but I want to try. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, and she nodded. I'd like that. He stepped forward hesitantly, as if unsure whether it was okay to close the distance between them. When Emily didn't pull away, he reached out and pulled her into a gentle, tentative hug. She felt the weight of his arms around her and allowed herself to sink into the moment. For the first time, she felt like she had found a piece of herself that had been missing all along. As Emily stepped out of the green room later that night, the cool night air hit her face like a bomb. Her heart felt lighter, though her mind still buzzed with thoughts. Meeting Daniel had been overwhelming, but it was a step forward, one that she hadn't realized she needed so badly until now. The way he had looked at her, the genuine emotion in his voice, his immediate desire to connect. It had been more than she dared to hope for. The drive home was quiet, except for the soft hum of music playing in the background. One of Daniel's older songs came on, and Emily found herself listening to the lyrics with a new perspective. It was a ballad about loss and longing, written long before she was born. She wondered if he'd written it during the same time he had met Christine. The thought made her smile faintly, though it was tinged with sadness. When she arrived home, the house was dark again. Emily quietly slipped inside, careful not to wake anyone. But as she walked through the living room, she saw a light on in the kitchen. Peeking in, she found Helen sitting at the table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. You're home, Helen said softly, her eyes lifting to meet Emily's. She looked tired, as if the weight of the last few days had worn her down. I am, Emily replied, stepping inside and leaning against the counter. Did you see him? Helen asked, her voice hesitant. Emily nodded. I did. Helen's hands tightened around the cup, and Emily took a moment to answer, gathering her thoughts. It went better than I expected. He didn't know about me. He had no idea. But he was kind, and he wants to get to know me. Helen's shoulders slumped slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. "I'm glad," she said quietly. "You deserve that." Emily crossed the room and sat down across from her. "Why didn't you ever tell me about him? Even after Dad passed, even after I got older, why didn't you say anything?" Helen looked down at her tea, her fingers tracing the edge of the cup. "Because I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought keeping things simple, keeping things stable, was better for you. Your father, the man who raised you, he loved you so much. He was a good man, and I didn't want to take that away from you." "I understand that," Emily said, her voice soft but firm. "But I still had a right to know. Even if it was messy, even if it was complicated, I had a right to know who I am." Helen nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're right. I see that now. And I'm sorry, Emily, for everything." Emily reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "I'm not angry anymore, Mom. Confused, hurt, yes. But I know you would just try and protect me. I love you for that." Helen's tears spilled over, and she squeezed Emily's hand tightly. "I love you too. More than anything." The next morning, Emily found Christine sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the trees. Emily hesitated for a moment before stepping outside and joining her. Christine glanced at her but didn't say anything. "I went to see him," Emily said, breaking the silence. Christine's grip tightened on her mug, and Emily sat down beside her. "It was a lot, but he wants to get to know me. He seemed genuine." Christine nodded slowly. "That's good. I was so scared he wouldn't want anything to do with you. I've spent so many years imagining the worst." Emily studied her mother, her real mother, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind Christine's sharp edges. "You were young," Emily said, her tone gentle. "You made mistakes, but you also gave me a chance at a stable life. I can't say I fully understand, but I'm starting to." Christine looked at her, hope flickering in her eyes. "I've spent my whole life wishing I could turn back time and do things differently, but I know I can't. All I can do is be here now. However you need me." Emily reached out and placed her hand over Christine's. "That's all I need. Just be here." Christine's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile fully. Over the next few weeks, Emily began to rebuild her relationship with both Helen and Christine. The lines between mother and sister, grandmother and mother, blurred in ways that still felt strange, but there was a new sense of honesty between them that made those dynamics easier to navigate. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of tension, misunderstandings, and even silence, but they were trying, and that made all the difference. Emily also kept in touch with Daniel. Their conversations were cautious at first, but as they grew more comfortable, she found herself opening up to him more. He shared stories from his life on the road, his struggles, and his regrets. She told him about her childhood, her love of music, and the ways she had felt different but never quite understood why. For the first time, she felt like she was beginning to know the man behind the legend. One evening, Daniel invited her to his home. He said there was something he wanted to share with her, something important. Emily hesitated, unsure of what to expect, but eventually agreed. When she arrived, Daniel led her to a spacious studio filled with instruments, framed records, and photos from his long career. "This," he said, picking up a notebook from a desk, "is something I've been working on since I met you. It's not finished, but I thought maybe we could work on it together." He handed her the notebook, and Emily read the lyrics. They spoke of new beginnings, of finding something you didn't know you were missing, of hope after years of wondering. Her heart swelled as she looked up at him. "I'd love to," she said, smiling. Daniel handed her a guitar, and together, they began to craft a song. It wasn't just music. It was their connection, unfolding note by note, word by word. They spent hours in the studio, laughing, experimenting, and sharing stories in between takes. By the end of the evening, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of belonging. A few days later, Daniel called her again. "I've got something special planned," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "I'm playing a private set for a small audience at a charity event, and I was hoping you'd join me on stage." Emily's breath caught. "Me? On stage?" "Yes, you. I mean, we've already started working together, and I think it would be incredible for us to share that song with an audience. No pressure, of course," he added quickly, "but I'd love to have you there." Emily hesitated, nerves prickling at the thought of performing in front of strangers. But then she thought of how far she'd come, of the strength she'd found in facing the truth about her family, in building bridges with the people who mattered most to her. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll do it." The night of the event arrived, and Emily stood backstage with Daniel, her heart pounding. She had chosen a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her guitar slung over her shoulder. Daniel, ever the seasoned performer, radiated calm confidence, though he kept sneaking her encouraging smiles. "Just breathe," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The moment you start playing, it'll all fall into place." When they stepped onto the small stage, the applause was warm and welcoming. Emily scanned the intimate audience and saw familiar faces. Helen and Christine sitting together, their smiles beaming with pride. Emily felt a surge of gratitude for their presence, for the journey they'd all shared to reach this moment. Daniel leaned into the microphone. "This next song is special. It's about new beginnings, and it's one I had the honor of writing with my daughter." The room erupted in applause, and Emily felt her cheeks flush. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. Together, they began to play. The first few chords were tentative, but as Emily's fingers moved across the strings, her confidence grew. Her voice joined Daniel's, their harmonies weaving together seamlessly. The lyrics told a story of loss and rediscovery, of mistakes and forgiveness, and the audience hung on every word. When the final notes faded, the room was silent for a heartbeat before bursting into cheers and applause. Emily turned to Daniel, and they shared a look of triumph and connection that words couldn't capture. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged, not just as his daughter, but as someone who had found her voice. After the performance, the audience mingled, and Helen and Christine found their way to Emily. Helen hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "You were amazing, sweetheart." Christine, her voice choked with emotion, added, "I've never been prouder of you." Emily smiled, embracing them both. "I couldn't have done it without you." Later that evening, as she stood outside under the stars with Daniel, Emily felt a quiet peace settle over her. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "For showing up, for being here, even after everything." Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Thank you for letting me. You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have." As they stood there, the music still echoing faintly from the venue, Emily realized that the pieces of her life were finally starting to fit together. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was hers. And that was enough.
Hi, this is Emily. Even I didn't see that coming, huh? What did you think of the story? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything new. See you next time.